Throughout the 19th century, though, we definitely see places where the church and state worked together very well, very closely, worked together very closely. And there are a variety of ways in which Christianity had significant impact on society. Throughout the 19th century, a lot of Protestants in the United States and in Great Britain believed that a true expression of their spiritual commitments would be reflected in bringing about social change. And so a variety of societies and organizations were developed to take care of a variety of moral issues. Poverty, prostitution, alcoholism, prison reform, rights for women, all sorts of social issues, and you have all sorts of societies working together. And this development becomes known, historians have referred to it as the Benevolent Empire, because often the people at the top of a lot of these societies were the same. Right? They might be in charge of, or they might oversee one society that is looking to spread copies of the Bible throughout the United States and the world, and they're also on the board of a group trying to discourage alcoholism, and another board working to end slavery. Right? And so their meetings tended to be around the same time in New York City. Right? So these very prominent individuals shaping a lot of this. But you have this idea of the church should be having significant impact in the society around it. That's one expression of this connection. On the negative side, as more and more Catholics immigrated to the United States throughout the 19th century, a large portion of the United States up to this point had been Protestant, but as more Catholics and then later Jews, to a smaller extent, immigrated to the United States, there were a lot of efforts by Protestants to use the state to develop laws and regulations that would limit immigration. And then as you have groups like the Mormons especially develop, again, there is this attempt by Christians to develop laws to prohibit the spread and the practice of these religions. Now, we can understand from the standpoint of Christians why you would want to try to limit the spread of something like Mormonism if you're opposed to it. But the idea that you would get the government to try and stop this, right? What happens to governments should make no laws, favoring an establishing religion. Right? And so, but the government did. There were a variety of laws passed. Congress passed a variety of laws, that were meant to stop the free exercise of certain types of religions. Slavery and Civil War, of course, I think is another place where you have this intertwining of church and state. Because while the Civil War is a political movement, the cause of the Civil War was slavery. That should be absolutely clear. The reason the Civil War was fought was slavery. A lot of the political officials in the South said so. An additional issue was states' rights, but most of it was states' rights to hold people in bondage. But the moral impetus from the Union was this Christian desire to eliminate slavery. And there were a lot of Christians in the South that justified slavery, but there's a lot of people in the North who are also using Christian principles to advocate for the abolition of slavery. So the Civil War, on both sides, has a lot of intertwining of religious beliefs, religious justifications, about this political event. There are other things we could talk about in the 19th century that also more fully demonstrate how church and state often were intertwined. As we move into the 20th century, you begin to see similar types, you continue to see similar types of things. As fundamentalism developed in the 20th century, often fundamentalists had some success in putting forth legislation that prohibited certain activities. The 18th Amendment to the United States prohibiting the manufacture and sale of alcohol was partly due to fundamentalist influence. Of course, fundamentalism meets its downfall in attempting to politically eliminate evolution from being taught in public schools. Right? So it's kind of, you live by the sword, you die by the sword, right? You live by politics, you die by politics. So you have that aspect of it. Throughout the 20th century, there are a variety of First Amendment cases that take place, some that strike down practices like prayer in public schools, the reading of the Bible in public schools, others that uphold the free exercise of religion. So Jehovah's Witnesses are faced with a variety of legislation, regulations, trying to prohibit them from going door to door, handing out literature. It goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court rules that legislation is against the First Amendment. There are a variety of things related to the practice of Native American religion. And all of this, of course, has profound effect on churches as well. Right? As some churches have some issues that go to the Supreme Court, others that don't. So there's all sorts of ways in which the First Amendment in the 20th century becomes a major focus of a lot of court cases. And in trying to find a way to draw that line, where does that wall between separation, the wall of separation, where does that fit? And for example, this more of a Native American case, but there's a Native American guy in the 80s, I think it was, who is a participant in the Native American church. It says church, but it's not necessarily a Christian group, it's a Native American group. One of the things the Native American church participates in is the use of peyote. Peyote is a hallucinogenic and causes you to experience hallucinations. Now, Native Americans for centuries had used peyote in a variety of religious rituals, but in this particular situation, this particular individual, last name was Smith, goes to work the next day after participating in this ritual and drug test. Right, and so of course he fails because he'd taken peyote the night before, and so he's fired. Well, for the government, peyote is a controlled substance at the time. I think it is still a controlled substance, although there have been laws that have allowed its use in the Native American church. So, here is a law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. And so, is it an issue where this man's rights need to be protected? And I believe in this case, in this case, the state was allowed to prohibit him from receiving unemployment benefits and other things because he was fired over taking peyote, even though it was used religiously. Right? It wasn't used recreationally; it was used religiously. And so sometimes, I mean, it's just been a very, very complex issue. Some of which has had impact on Christianity, some of which has had impact on other issues. Also important for our thinking about Christianity and society in the United States is the rise of immigration of non-Christian religions. Particularly in the latter half of the 20th century, a lot of Eastern religions. Certainly there's been a lot of Muslim immigration, but then also Hinduism, Buddhism, other Chinese religions, which has had a significant impact on the religious makeup of the United States. Still, as we saw earlier in the video, a large majority of people identify as Christian, but it has changed the religious landscape. Which, you know, that along with the First Amendment cases, along with a variety of other issues, has led a lot of people, a lot of Christians in the latter half of the 20th century into the 21st century to have some serious concerns about the direction of the country. And so in the 1970s and 80s, there were a variety of organizations that developed that have now been called the religious right. People who were conservative politically, but were also operating from Christian convictions, trying to see a variety of changes take place in the government. And so people running for office, people supporting certain bills, so people fighting against other types of bills out of religious convictions. And so you have this, you know, this kind of intertwining again of politics and religion, and wanting to see that become the shape of the land. An extreme of that is what's known as dominion theology or Christian Reconstruction. So you have the religious right, which is interested in working within the government of the United States as it is, to advance a conservative political agenda, a moral agenda about a variety of subjects. But then you have this extreme that becomes popular in the 20th century, still has some influence these days, but it's not like it was. It's known as dominion theology or Christian Reconstruction, which essentially was the idea of, you know, very simply developing a theocracy in the United States instead of a constitutional republic. You know, wanting to see essentially the establishment of the laws of the Bible as the laws of the land. Again, small minority of people, an extreme out of the religious right, but another one of these ways in which Christians have struggled with this issue. So now that we've had this kind of historical development, it comes down to the simple question of how should Christians think about church and state? And once again, I think we have to recognize that before we try to answer this question, we should think about how our first answer to this question is often influenced by our context. Now, some of us are immediately going to say church and state are separate because we should be separate because we live in the United States of America, First Amendment. Others are immediately going to say, well, the church should have influence on the state because they've maybe grown up in a rather conservative household. But let's go past those immediate responses and recognize the diversity of opinion, the ways in which this question has been a complicated one, as well as sometimes the extremes that take place when Christians have gotten political power. So once again, of course, we can't say, oh, as some, right? There are some people out there today saying we need to just kind of retreat entirely from society. Well, you can't do that. You got to be in the world, not of the world. So you got to be in the world. And you have to interact with society because there's the Great Commission. Go into all the world. And you know, accommodating to our culture, that's not our main focus. Our focus is church and state. But we have to be careful how we accommodate to our culture. So how do we, in a representative republic, very democratic type of approach, how do we, as Christians, think about what our role should be? Because a lot of us today accept certain things that we accept because, well, that's the way they are, right? But how do we truly make those determinations? Instead of just accepting the way they are, what if the way they are is wrong? Or, on the other hand, how do we prove that the way they are is right? And so that's one of the things that I want us to think about from this standpoint. Right? A lot of us assume today certain ideas about church and state based on our location, our background, family views, all those kind of things. But what is a Christian response or a Christian theology when it comes to church and state that is, I mean, all of these are Christian in the sense of you have people that claim to be Christians promoting. So what's a biblical, though, right? A biblical approach to this that would help us to have a consistent model of church and state. So that's kind of what I want us to think about coming out of this topic.